Chapter 1 of the Town of Nor. There are many towns and cities in the world of Golka. One in particular had great misfortune, and stood and battled in the northernmost reaches, Nor. To passers-by it was a town like many others, small and simple, a stone keep risen in the middle of a palisade, adorned with hoardings, flags and regalia, which gaily rolled in the breeze. The keep shadowed a small village beneath, from which smoke rose from a dozen chimneys behind the wooden walls. However, in the dull morning, when the cold light of Arboron peered through cliff-tops and nestled under thick grey clouds, one would see the ghostly silence that remained within Nor's walls after light-break. The hustle and bustle of a regular village was not to be had there, no merchants travelling to and from its heavy wooden gates. Only a few ragged soldiers littered the ramparts with chin-straps ajar, loosely fitting mails and battle gear on beleaguered bodies. The extent of Nor's problem would not be realized by the onlooker, however, until pushing past its crooked gates, upon whose creaking announcement the town would come to full view in its broken down and shabby state. The grounds were dishevelled and poorly maintained. A ragtag bunch of malnourished villagers walked hither and thither, letting off billows of chilled breath as they wandered to their rewardless daily grind. Onward then the traveller amidst this place would bear witness to the ancient great hall, standing proud like the last offending tooth of a hag amidst their otherwise barren gums. Its posterior annexed the newer keep, the high hall of Nor, and had long lost its lustre. From mountings had fallen carvings of dragons and beasts who themselves were once gilded, and many a roof tile had blown loose. However, in nothing else but stature the hall stood grandiose. Further still, through the once highly decorated, paint-flaked doors, one would see there, in the dusty light, a most perplexed lord. He too had seen better days. His townsfolk were suffering from something he could not allay with wits alone. Sitting with furrowed brow, sometimes drooping head to hand, he sat in deep thought, day after day, seeking counsel and remedies. Today, as many days gone by, a pensive silence fell upon the hall. The Lord's ministers and chamberlains stood by his side, offering little service, for naught direction was there left to give in this time of sadness. Long had ill fate plagued this embattled place, and all plans had thus far failed. A bluish light hued the hall, where dusty beams of pale illumination shone upon the chamber floor. A lonesome pigeon was heard in the rafters, agitating its wings, high above, from which a feather, ruffled loose, shone momentarily as it passed the light shaft in the gloomy hall. Gently drifting, it came to rest at the feet of the weary, aged lord. His eyes slowly fell upon it, discerning and warm. They then turned to meet those of a man who accompanied him. The problem, ever present and perplexing, was deeply ingrained in the lines of the Lord of Nor's face, who then spoke.
I have long thought on our troubles, Ulfinus, friend. It is time I passed judgment and relay to thee on the proceedings which will decide the fate of our town. No longer may we disregard what paths lay available to us, dark though they may be. Fetch the oracle. I shall meet her here and speak my mind thoughts, for no thane lord shall I be if I sit idle at the throne of Nor, wherefore I shall not be worthy of it.
Ulfinus bowed and left, vanishing into the long shadows of the hall, with an air of apprehension surrounding him. For though he knew not the particulars of the Lord's plan, the oracle was a well-known ill in the village, whom most would seek to avoid. The dusty air swirled as he passed into darkness. The perplexion upon which the Lord of Nor was forever consumed was of a terrible malady which had long stalked the crooked town, further reaching than the failure of crops, for its people were afflicted by a strange unexplainable sickness. Indeed, plight, at least, was not something uncommon in feudal Golkan villages. However, such ills, through many an exhausted leech, would eventually pass. Problems were never so extensive as was the bane of Nor's inhabitants. Nearly 2 anguishing decades had passed where Nor's people had ebbed. The youngster and the adolescent knew not a happy and fulsome Nor, if indeed there ever had been. In times gone by, wise men had forewarned of Nor's proximity to the borders of the high wood, yet pride and greed in the race for expansion had thrown caution to the wind, and thus the town had been there built. Comeuppance, therefore, thought the learned, that the town had since suffered at the whim of a powerful curse. As for the populace who did not succumb to it, They absconded. Merchants shunned the place, and the population had dwindled. Amongst those persons missing, men and women both were legion, yet most outlying in the numbers, and most peculiar of all, those stolen away, was the disappearance of the town's young maidens. It was said that those of the fair sex, yet to be wed, were the most common lost persons in Nor, and though it was not admitted by those in control, the consensus spake of an old power, a spirit, who had become jealous of man's growth and aware of its own enfeeblement by his encroachment. It was said a dark one lurked deep in the recesses of the ancient wood, a spirit who had once been queen of all she touched, who was the daughter of the Nerns, who had grown terribly powerful and despicably envious. Many tales spake of such a one who perverted the honourable hearts of errant knights, and of one who stole away the innocence and virginal beauty of maidens for her own wicked pleasure. Many did not accept that all the stories related to but one entity, but those grieving parents who would retell of their child's apprehension would beg to differ. Some maidens would lose their way, perhaps out in a field in pursuit of some innocent proceedings, gathering crops or fetching water, at which time, during an alignment of the moon and the stars, the wind would blow, and on it an ethereal wisp of enchanting mist would writhe, its dainty path breezing to and fro unto these maidens, transfixing them. For others the magic was powerful enough to grant levitation. To the air like leaves would they flutter, pulled silently without call to recourse for their somnolence. Through open windows, or from their toil-made slumber, in the afternoon beneath a tree, away they went, their kinsmen none the wiser to their disappearing, until such a time they found their place unoccupied. For others still, their steps were like mice upon snow in a state of dreary sleepwalk, with a winding sporadic dance not of their making. And indeed there were those, most peculiar of all, a fourth kind of maiden, who after hearing the wondrous tales of the dark woods of Golka, would purposefully seek out this trail. If indeed they found it, and if the tales are to be believed, none of this fourth kind, or any other, had ever returned. Only the bards could truly shed light on that which was the maiden's fate, for they had woven the many words together of those who had accompanied the fallen therein, the troubadour, the page, the squire, who had escaped and yet bore witness to their master's demise. By their reckoning it was concluded the following fate of those taken by the wood. Upon coming into the deep forests of the Golkan heartland, there was a forest made of maidens, who had impaled and also formed of the wood itself. About them a dire fog lurked, some remnant of the celestial wind, trapped like a beast. The Utenile, sung about in legend, once the enchanted road by which the ancients had arrived. Yet somewhere along the path of memory, some part of it was stolen, retained upon the face of the world, where its golden lustre had been transmuted to hues of dark purple. Like the unbroken wild horse, it was wielded only by a whisperer, a dark soul who desired naught but ill with its use. In her thousandth incarnation, the Lady of the Wood bent the Utenile to her will, and with it transfixed her prey, where she transformed them into her own twisted creations. A forest of sapient saplings that bore their youthful energy unto the ground and gave to her fresh life. In this sororicide the Lady of the Forest gorged on them. However, in doing so she created her own incarceration, for she was bound, in physical form at least, to the forest, a prison which she had made for herself, of mangled wooden limbs, surrounded by lifelessness. This and all other tales of the grim witch of the wood raced around in the mind of the Lord of Nor, who still sat contemplating, waiting on Ulfens to return. He fell to daydream now and then as the light in the hall ebbed, and through such a dappled visage he glimpsed times in his youth when he had marched to war with other soldiers. He and his housecarls had stood on the field of valor and beaten back their foes with iron swords and courage. Then, standing in his midst atop a bloodied hill of carnage, within his mind a black figure arose, whose gore-matted hands grasped one by one around the haft of a gruesome weapon, placing with confidence each finger, tightening its grasp. Eyes shone out on the hooded shadow. The clamour of war raised to silence as the lord and his foemen caught each other's stir. Wind billowed the mane of the beast as it stood ready, with determined eyes set upon its prey. Suddenly the Lord of Nor's daydream was broken.
We will meet again, O war brother. In death grip we shall,
he thought, as from the shadows Ulfinus returned. At his side was a bedraggled woman, who held herself awkwardly.
Wherefore thou callest me hitherto, my liege?
She bid the Lord, with a broken, crackling voice.
Upon that of stratagem I bid thee on thy counsel, Oracle, though it pains me to stoop to thee,
quoth the Lord of Nor. But before he could relay what it was he wanted her to give him counsel on, she read his mind and found all the intricacy of his thoughts laid bare.
Yes, feelest I the reason for thy summoning me? So strong in thine mind is it set, like the blade parting flesh asunder, a plan made of blood and of bone, of thy very own kindred dost thou plots.
She craned her face closer to the Lord's, who seemed totally unmoved by her quirks. She continued with a considering manner, half questioning her own words and the perceived will of the Lord of Nor.
It is certainly within her time, but meddling with the nuns chanceth well, nor shall fate be pleased. Nevertheless, I shall think upon the correct chant, and question the ancients without query.
She babbled.
What durst she speak of, my lord?
Questioned Ulfinus pensively.
She hath read me, Ulfinus,
said the Lord of Nor, dismayed.
Stay back from her. And thou, Oracle, be careful lest ye conjure evil in my sacred spirit hall,
he warned, seeming for a moment reanimated with a superstitious fear, chastened by her theft of his thoughts. She bowed her head in silence, then turned away from the Lord and his ministers, muttering indiscernible nonsense. All onlookers had in some way crept silently closer in the meantime, craning an ear to her odd manner, as she let out screams of lament in one moment, then a childlike laughter in another. It was as though she held a deep, disparate conversation with someone or something who was not visually present. Then in an instant she reached into a tattered pocket and cast some objects on the floor, stooping over them. The Lord of Nor and his ministers looked on, perplexed. The light in the hall pulsated, writhing hither and thither. The oracle fell upon one of the objects, lasciviously pulling her wretched form to and fro. Then she sat, frozen, her eyes shut. She turned slowly until facing the Lord, whereupon her wrinkled lids unveiled two waxen globes. Temporarily blinded, she said,
Fortuna is content with this plan of thine, my liege. The omen is good.
She crookedly smiled, then promptly fell about the floor, heaped in a ragged garb. The Lord, who had by now thrown off his lethargy, with eyes dazzled in wonder, leant ever closer. Taking his hand from his beard, he pulled himself back into the comfort of his throne.
Ulfinus, my ever-attentive counsellor, listen to my words carefully. I have not uttered my plan previously, lest it become diluted by ill thoughts. In my bones hath I felt it for a good while, that our time hither is nigh, on account of this dreadful curse. My daughter, the princess of this town, is soon to be of an age that would see her most fittingly wed. Yet alack and alas, so too would it see her ripe for the picking of that dread fiend, ripped from this place to whatever grim fate that I should not even begin to entertain. I cannot see her lost as have so many others. Tomorrow she turns 18, her time grows short.
What is thy proposal, my liege?
Quoth Ulfinus.
Our hall is to be filled for solstice banquet tonight. One more night that I may keep my beloved child in view, lest the forces of Golka should steal her away prematurely. See that Geether attends, and is watched carefully therefore.
He paused for a moment in contemplation, then hastily added,
Be mindful of her mother's ways. Guard her well, and find us that my men are at her side at all times. Thou shalt send forth riders to the cities round about, and with them go thyself. Seek thee for word on eligible suitors, and then come straightway home when thou dost have an answer. For when wed, she may be legally taken from this place by her husband, no longer a vassal of my tutelage, free from this curse. And to that heavy task I beg of thee to complete, I add, be cheery, friend, for long have I established good trade with the lords of surrounding lands. Thence they shall help thee see to it, that she is found a groom at haste.
Ulfinus obeyed his master's orders and conveyed his plan to a dozen riders who sped away upon the remaining spirited steeds that Nor had left to offer. The Lord slumped back into his chair and the day grew long. He languished in his throne as he had before. Later, servants stoked up the great fire, in the centre of which the crackling heat rose into the air, slowly twisting and leaning slightly to one side, whereby a draught in loose thatching took its interest. Night descended upon Nor, and for once the merry occasion saw plentiful guests arrive, and the hall was slowly filled. Whole families with all members came, all with offerings of foodstuffs prepared for a long table of plenty. They packed every cranny in the vast room, with high laughter and neighbourly joviality in spite of their daily woes. The doors were welcomingly opened to those townfolk who lingered on in the embattled village. All for that moment gave up their sorrow as they joined in the fleeting happiness that was to be had of this biannual occasion. In the high upraised tower of the keep of Nor, the gentle trickle of hall laughter came, bounding like an untamed hound. It was welcomingly received by the sullen princess who was until then engaged in the work deemed proper for her, namely the spinning wheel. She sat up suddenly at the sound which crept in. Her ears pricked. Down went the tools. Rapidly her chaperones dressed her for the event. Hurriedly she descended the winding stairs and entered the hall, where she bid homage and other well-wishings to her father. Gracefully she settled at a high-crested chair bearing her insignia, a lozenge-shaped badge painted with a golden field, upon whose upper party was perched a rampant white horse, the symbol of her mother. Below, a sable field, upon which a salient fox was poised, the symbol of her father. Her courtly timidity was endearing to those townsfolk who, in the dark times, saw her as a ray of hope, and much like the bounteous produce that was brought for the solstice, she was the most beautiful and radiant of ladies, not least of Nor present. However, such a temperament was a veil to her true self, for she scrutinized the other guests who assembled with penetrating wiles and worldliness. She was strong-hearted and sturdy in her resolve, a lover of adventure, and for such a hobby had she frequently been chastised for her abscondment and subsequent recidivism. Yet the Lord of Nor was a kind soul, and would always relent, for he saw in her the fiery temperament of her mother, who was a keen huntress. Thinking it to be a disservice to his queen's memory to quell the desire within his daughter, however keen she thought her senses to be, she did not spy the watchful eye and ever-attentive gaze of her father's courtiers, who for the moment from the shadows made sure every potential exit to her was thwarted. The princess soon laxed in her courtly temperament to the ire of her chaperons. Upon the tables rested many a tankard into which mead flowed. Rosy-cheeked well-wishers lifted a cup in her honour, one by one hailing her Queen of the Solstice. Even grandsires would point to her in the town square on a time, and say unto children, "Thither is the Princess Gyda, the very eminence of good tidings and luck." Her father was glad at his daughter's wassailing. Moreover was he filled with joy at the thought that perhaps for once she would stay put for long enough for his plan, through Ulfinus, to go as it should. For now his heart warmed to see his child enjoy herself. Thereupon this worrisome thane, who sat heavily under heaviest of burdens, smiled, albeit briefly, because he knew that his plot had only just begun. The thought of his plan's success deeply troubled him, for if it were to be successful, then what vacant shabbiness would he bear in future days when his daughter princess, only child and light of his life, was sent away? Such grim thoughts he shook from his mind, as presently he noticed a revelrous group of haughty drunkards, who came toward Princess Gyda and offered her a game. The lord watched pensively, for he knew the fickle nature of the commoners at their undoubted besting. Gyda was a shrewd tactician. It was the guarantee of her victory that caused the lord to anxiously observe, for his daughter, although by no means the frame of a warrior, nor even a burly peasant, was a brilliant strategist. A game of Fortuna they played, a popular card game of morality. No match for his skill in pairing, the peasants were vanquished one by one, and thus was the quickest round of such a game there had. She quashed them all utterly, most of which took their loss with grace. However, one loser, irked by constant failure, stood disheartened. He toasted the Lord of Nor, who returned the formality. The peasant, intoxicated, drew attention to his hosts and himself,
If her father,
He cynically pointed to the Lord of Nor.
dread Thane, would permit.
The Lord gestured with hand that the peasant may continue, rolling his eyes somewhat at the guest's inability to hold his mead. The drunkard smiled and began.
Good sovereigns all, I bid thou commoners as the kings thou art, though I know not all. Hearken to me, for I wish to convey that this lord hath sired a she-devil, no less, with wits no man may match. Not even those of higher station, but say I, my utmost appreciation to thee, my lord, for in spite of thy daughter, I love thee, not least for thy continued heart which thou spillest upon our town, which from the time of the grey-bearded Algathar the Great, to thee hast thy family maintained this place. I can think of only one way I may show my gratitude, for no coins have I.
Drunkenly, he stumbled, then continued.
So do I throw myself at thy service, and offer my hand for this thy daughter princess. Then shall I for thee quell her, as a good husband ought his wife, and one problem less wilt thou suffer in this embattled place. So do I bid thee, Lord of Nor, or Thane of Nor.
The Lord turned his attention, which had drifted off somewhat, to the peasant, roused at the utter petulance and the thought of having his plan in some way uncovered. Marriage indeed was on the cards, but not for this village buffoon.
Thou durst bring insult upon my daughter, base cur? Wishest thou for her hand indeed? I would be mindful to rout thee out from thy place like a rat from a wheat rick, if not the night was celebrant. Be thee mindful in my sacred hall, for though my cups flow with the mead for thee, it clearly suits ye not. In sooth, I should rather have my daughter beat thee by drinking, since thou cannot hold thyself, not least in that.
Swaying still, eyes blinking independently of each other, and undeterred by the Lord of Nor's steely sober anger, the guest mumbled.
Not worthy then, am I? What say ye?
Before the enraged Thane could give rise, an almighty ruckus of laughter let up from the already intoxicated throng, the which the Lord of Nor himself calmed and chuckled, realizing the unfortunate state this guest was in, and potentially may find himself in the morning. 'Twas indeed a lucky occurrence that the housecarls were joined in at the revelry, and those who were aware of the Lord's plan swore not to speak of the event thereafter. For an insult of such magnitude may have lost a man his head. Long and hard did they all feast at what seemed to be the last of the good meat in the forsaken town, but eventually the chain of food from weary kitchen workers, which had steadily trundled all night, came to an end. At the drawing of the close, more than enough had been consumed by the participants, who by now were full to the brim. Villains who had ventured from the night's cold were ready to burst, and lay about, relaxed, idly conversing in their engorged state. The princess, however, was eager to stir from the table, yet out of respect to her father she anxiously stayed a while longer. She had many a secretive errand of her own in which she engrossed, for she was studious and longed for all the knowledge of the world. It beckoned her most earnestly, and filled her waking hours with wonder. Nor, though shabby and broken, maintained a collection of historic tomes that had come from her forefathers. She had read them all in her youth, but recently had stumbled upon a secret corner, far older, dustier, and therefore more enchanting to her, whereby several other books, peculiarly unmarred by time, had shone out, taking her interest. They were written in a tongue that could not be deciphered with the rudimentary tools she had to hand. They were also fantastically illuminated, and thus she spent hours attempting to determine what they could possibly depict. So then did she in secret seek the authority of the learned, and had meant to liaise with an old alchemist who was well informed. He was a quirky fellow whom she had never met in the town before recently, for, being a keen purveyor of charity upon her villagers, knew nearly all their faces and names. This was a welcome change, for it was most common in similar towns for those in authority to be harsh and demeaning towards their townsfolk. But the princess and her father had always exercised a fair hand and love unto their people, which in some way caused their plight to strike a deeper blow with them, that their town, out of all, suffered.
Aha!
Quoth the Lord of Nord in a loud exclamation, as one last surprise, a huge cake came slowly toward the Lord's table. He himself rose and lifted his arm, saying,
Good people all, ladies and gentle sirs, war brothers and housecarls, I bid thee look upon the closing of this solstice feast, with this offering of mine to thee. Aye, it saddens me to bring such tidings indeed, but I ask thee now, as on all prior years, and by the changing of the moon, that thou grant me but one wish. I plead ye, thy arms are tired from the toil, but lay not thine tools for the ill tidings by which we are beset. Believe in me, believe in Golka, believe in Gita. I ask once more, and with thy stomach filled highly, grant my daughter the same profundity in service as thou hast me in my time, however undeserved thou must think I be.
The crowd, all in unison, cried otherwise to the Lord's nihilistic words.
Nay, Lord, thou art our most highly regarded sworn sovereign. From ancient heights has thy blood descended, and we honour thee and thy ancestors with our toiling lives, that we may live in peace.
Quoth one rotund bearded serf.
Jotham,
Quoth the Lord of North, for 'twas the man's name.
thine family hath saved our royal blood throughout the ages. Many kind words hast thou spilt for my benefit. Therefore shall ye take the first slice of this wholesome pie.
He then turned to the rest of the throng, saying,
Likewise, ye all in turn come hither and take said portions, till ne'er again can one fellow talk of other feasts gone by to match that of tonight.
The assemblage cheered again.
And yet, hear ye, for I say thee, baked within this tremendous pudding, a fortune of wonder gifts lie, as is the tradition. Take what thou may, and each use his gift, as thou see befitting.
What kindness this Lord showed. His people surely cherished his leadership. All around they praised him and lifted cups in his thanks. Many a patron cut swathes of pie for themselves and found lodging dotted around the cosy hall. A young, scrappy-looking peasant boy, whose portion was nearly the size of his own head, skipped toward two great dogs, one regal in stance, the other comfortably slumped ensconced beside the huge fire. Arguably, hallhounds are the most cunning of characters. For besides the intellect of man with his well-considered tricks and wiles, what other creatures come but half as close than all those muzzled beasts who, under the guise of plaintive innocence, seek the rudimentary? Thus, from their undiscerning master's fair hand, eke out an existence more wholesome than many a king. At any rate, the young peasant boy for now sat and ate his cake slice, upon which he discovered a black glass jewel. His eyes shone with excitement, unveiling the encrusted hem of a brooch. Hurriedly he further devoured until at his hands a chain attaching the aforementioned parts lay. Placing the object now most dear to him in a tattered breast pocket, he was fulfilled, content, and soon drowsy. Upon the welcoming side of a hallhound did he take rest, unable to complete his ponderous portion. Thereby did one dog give a look at his brethren with doleful eyes, for he dared not disturb his new boy master laying on his back. Inadvertently cunning hallhounds may have been, yet above all their qualities their chiefest virtue was loyalty. However, the stalemate was soon settled, for the second dog, unable to allay the bounds of his beastly heritage, broke his otherwise regal air, and, slavering, devoured with chopping jaws the remnants of the boy's cake. Gyda, who had become woefully bored at this point, had pricked up some degree of interest at the way in which her father's generosity had stirred the applause of her pupils. Her eagerness to vacate the hall was now overcome by another emotion, for the people, busied with excitement and brimming with well-wishings, foretold of their most undying allegiance to her and her father's bloodline, in answer to his prior plea, something which to some degree dazzled young Gyda, for so many thick hands and splintered teeth clapped and bit at her that she may have taken more fright if the words that slammed through those weather-worn mouths were not of heartfelt praise and faithfulness. The Lord of Nor viewed all and happily sat back. He had managed to keep his daughter in the great hall for as long as he could. The torches grew dim, and deepest, darkest night had settled. Now was it time for the princess's wards and chaperons to lecture her upon her beauty sleep, which, although a regular nightly occurrence, their approach this night was more impertinent. Eventually, though she protested, the young princess gave way. She retired as daintily as she had arrived, back up the winding stairs, whilst many around her slumped in dream. Well fed and well entertained. Her father happily bid her good evening, then joyously turned to his people, those still awake, after her long silken dress had completely vanished from sight.
one more gift I have for thee all. May ye all rest from thy work tonight, and bid no contemplation to stoking the fire in thine hearths. Lie here in my hall under the gaze of the ancients, and the heat of my great fire. Well rested shalt thou be in the Lord of Nor's company this night.
They all cheered, looking about them to seek places to sleep within the hall. Many of the town guard had also left their posts, and were now bedding down beside benches, laying war spears at their side. Others, worse for wear for the strong mead, had already unconsciously stumbled hither and thither with the other townsfolk. The Lord of Nor watched as, like a doting herdsman tending his flock to sleep in a stable, they all became still. Gleefully, he then retreated to his main chamber, and expected the arrival of his arch-chamberlain, Ulfinus, who was to give word of a successful mission. So it came to him in the late hours with beaming smiles.
All is set, my lord.
Bid Ulfinus.
By now, I have it on good authority. She is fast asleep. Assuredly, she shall not stir after such wholesome fulfilment this night. Riders are outset, and now to them shall I join and find before the morrow a suitor of royal descent for the hand of thy daughter.
Well done, kind Ulfinus, and on thou further mission I bid all luck go with thee. Take my finest horse, and whence thou doth return, with good tidings, take rest in coin for thy hardships. Ne'er has there been a more attentive fellow as thee. Good luck.
All, it seemed, had gone to plan. He therefore ordered reinforcements to watch the passage of his daughter's chamber. Excessive, one may think, but alas, she was a cunning child, and he could take no risks. Extra precautions did he take, therefore, in order to prevent her escape in the eventuality she became suspicious, as she had done in the past, when it pleased her to do so. She had escaped with ease, and thwarted even the most veteran of her father's men. The long woolen tapestries of the Lord's chamber gently billowed in the vacuum of the great hall fire, from which a dying glow ebbed. It illuminated the lordly chamber in gentle flickers of orange and red. The chamber was itself adorned with many dying torches. Similarly was the Lord of Nor spent. He removed his crown and other regalia, letting out a sigh, for in truth he knew his plan, even that which he had relayed to faithful Ulfinus, had only been half unveiled. Only that irksome oracle was invidiously privy to the information, and this thought sickened the aging thing. His smile dropped. Then, placing his fingers onto his closed eyelids to rub them, he gained some relief and found sleep. What mystery was it, then, that still remained shrouded in the plan of the Lord? Perhaps morning would shed clear light.